breakfast puppies?
This podcast contains adult language and content and is meant for mature audiences. Listener discretion is advised.
Oh my God, you're listening to the Glitterbois. Today's topic, back to the realm of house rules. We haven't really had much of a dive into these lately, and it's a Palladium game. Everyone's got them. I don't know if anybody runs Palladium by the book. I don't think Kevin runs Palladium by the book.
While that point is indeed true, NPC, my dear friend, when it comes to gaming systems and mechanics, you are like a tuner looking at a car and an LS swap engine.
I know some of those words.
For a portion of our audience, they know exactly what I'm talking about. This man would, as far as games are concerned, he'll LS swap a GeoJit Metro.
I do like tinkering with game mechanics.
And I say that with love, because in all honesty, a lot of the time you improve things.
Well, thank you. This house rule that I wanted to discuss today is one that I didn't come up with myself. It's something I saw on the Reddits a few years ago in a discussion about making combat run smoother and managing attacks, balancing all that out and around, such as when you have, one character with 11 attacks, but another character with 4. How do you make it fun for everyone kind of thing? How do you balance it out so that everything is moving with a nice, smooth flow? And the reason we're talking about this today, the reason I proposed this as one of our discussed conversation topics, is this has actually come up in a few conversations that I've had outside of this podcast realm, just with friends and random people online talking about how they manage combat. And I had mentioned, oh yeah, we use the 3-phase round, and they're like, what is that? And I was like, I actually kind of thought more people knew about this. So I guess, judging by the surprise from both Jacob and Matthew when I talked about it, I guess it's not as well known as I thought it was. The 3-phase round, melee round, the round of combat. The concept of the round being you roll initiative at the beginning, everybody takes their actions in order, and the beginning of the next round you roll initiative and everybody takes their actions again. That's the round. Everybody gets a turn and does their attacks. So this house rule, this approach breaks down that round into 3 sub-rounds, or we'll just call them phases.
Mm-hmm.
You take the attacks per melee, or your action points, however you look at them, you take those and you spread them across those 3 phases. So let's say you have 6 attacks per melee. And then in phase 1, you'd have 2. In phase 2, you'd have 2. And then phase 3, you'd have 2. That's a nice even number, right? So if everybody has, let's just say everybody in the combat has exactly 6. So we go around the table and everybody uses 2 of their attacks. And we go around the table again and everybody uses 2 more. And we go around the table a third time and everybody uses the last 2. Some people will have more than that. Some people will have fewer. So let's say you have 4 attacks per melee. So the first round you would have 2. The first phase, you would have 2. The second phase, you would have 1. And the third phase, you would have 1. Or 5 would be 2, 2, and 1. 7 would be 3, 2, and 2, and so on. You kind of divvy them out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, that kind of flow.
How do you handle actions that require more than 1 action point / attack?
That is what I think is the beautiful part of this system, is that you start the action in 1 phase and you are in the process of performing it, but it doesn't complete until you have passed enough phases to invest enough of your action points or attacks into fueling that action. So if you have 4 attacks per melee and you want to take a single attack with a gun, but you want to aim it, so that's going to cost 1 extra, and you want to make it a called shot, so that's going to cost another extra. So that attack is costing you 3 of your actions. Well, if you got 4, the first phase, you would start it and you would have spent 2 of the required 3. Come your next turn in the second phase, you pay the last action and it executes. That's when it happens.
And you've played with this rule before.
Yes.
Have you ever run into people functionally having wasted attacks or action points during a phase where it's like, I have 1 more, there's nothing really I can do with it or anything?
No more than I have that having seen that happened in normal combat.
Okay.
And I've rarely seen that happen. Usually people can think of plenty of things to do with their attacks, such as attack.
How do you handle reactions then that take an action, that take an attack or something like dodge without auto dodge or that sort of thing? Does that steal from the next phase or pull down your total numbers?
Depends. I mean, it would work exactly as it normally works. So if you are auto dodging, of course, it doesn't cost you anything. But
Right.
if you're using a dodge, it would take from your next available action, be it actions that you have remaining this turn, which were you using the standard flow would be exactly the same. You just pay for it from your existing attacks. Or if you don't have any left this melee round, then it would come from the first phase of the next round.
Okay, cool. Okay.
This creates a situation where you have more timing based things happen. So back in one of the things that I really liked about Advanced Dungeons and Dragons 2nd edition was also something that everyone else fucking hated. And that was weapon speed, where weapon speed would factor into your initiative score. So you rolled initiative, but then you factored in your weapon speed. And the higher the speed, the longer it took to use it. So you would announce what you were doing at the beginning of the round, and then based upon that, it would adjust your initiative, and then people who knew that was happening could interrupt that action.
Right.
This creates more of that happening in Palladium, where you see them beginning to cast the spell.
Right.
Or you see the sniper, you literally see them lining up the shot and they are about to pull the trigger, but now you have something, and now your turn is here. They haven't paid for it yet. So you get an option to possibly interrupt and break that action.
I'm not inherently opposed to it. I'm saying that mostly so you don't try to read my face and think I'm like, I hate it. I detest this. As a former wargamer, current wargamer, and a veteran of Phoenix Command, I'm used to dealing with impulses and subdividing phases and all of that concept. And I'm not inherently opposed to it. And actually, some of the games I've designed are kind of predicated on the same model. And so, yeah, I can see it. I'm just, at this point, my brain's trying to go through and figure out any edge case where that either brings up questions or would you allow wrapping from one combat round into another?
That's a good question. I would say that would depend upon the situation. My take on it, were somebody to ask something like that, oddly, it's never happened in the years that I've used the system. But if you want to do that, if you really badly want to do that, and you can make a case for why you should be able to do that, I could say at most you could take one round's stuff and push it into the next, or one phase, just one phase, not a whole round.
Right.
But at the same time, if you're already thinking ahead enough, that you want to bring that action forward, my take is that you just need to start that action now.
Right.
Why wait?
Yeah, that is it raised the two cases that came to mind were, one, can I steal a dodge from the top of the first phase of the next round? Or steal an action to dodge.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, well, that's
and
that's built into the core rules. That doesn't change.
Yep. And two, can I start a auto fire attack on my last action of the last phase of this round and have it execute on my first phase of the next round?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. As long as you, the player, can keep track of that number in your head, I don't see why not. Normally in Palladium, you can't do that. So, like, if you have 5 attacks and you've spent 4 of them, and the next one you want to attack someone, but you want to aim it, tough luck.
Tough luck.
With this, you simply start the action now, and you pay for it on your next phase of the next round.
Yeah, it does add bookkeeping, which again, I don't care about. I'm not opposed to that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And this is light enough where it's not a break the bank situation. My biggest question is, so when do you add grenade timing rules into this?
Why I love where you're going with this. So I love chunky grenade systems, and I use that word intentionally. My first exposure to like solid grenade mechanics was as a teenager. The first time I played Shadowrun. Shadowrun's grenade mechanics were fantastic. They even had, well, how does blast work in a small room?
Chunky salsa.
Yes. And I love bringing that over whenever I can. I even have a scatter die specifically for this. It is a big hollow D6 that has, it's clear. It's got black pips on it, but inside of it, it's got an arrow die. So you roll the die, and it determines how many meters or feet it scatters and in what direction. It's wonderful.
That definitely works.
So anyway, grenade timing. Well, if we're going to come up with a rule on the fly for this, I would say it depends upon the type of grenade.
Yes.
I don't think Palladium has built-in grenade timing rules.
Nope.
I guess if you wanted to really wing it, you got to figure 2 things. You got to figure scatter and timing.
Yep.
Scatter, I would have based upon its, I think Palladium does have like area of effect. So just take that and turn it into like a feet or meter or something.
Yep.
That would be a quick and easy hand wave. It's probably not the most accurate, but if you just want to run some numbers real quick, you set us a guideline. As for timing, I would say 1d4 actions or something, depending. And you could, like, if you had a skill with explosives, you could set it so that you could cook the grenade, as they say.
Yeah, because it allows for some interesting additions. Now, I would caution people about going too far down the rabbit hole that I would go down. Again, veteran Phoenix Command player, bullet speed is a factor of life. So but it does allow some interesting things to be done, because as a game master, you can do things like, as you're doing your prep, once X is triggered, the 5th phase after it is triggered, it happens. Like, you can predetermine some built-in timers. Like, after the big bad smacks the big red button on the panel, you have X phases to disarm the rocket, or whatever. And so I think it adds a heck of a lot potentially to the system. Yeah, I can see it.
Now I want to leave and stop recording so I can write some grenade scatter rules.
Yeah. And it's certainly better than what me and my buddies were doing back in late middle school, where we were annihilating dragons because we beat them on the initiative roll, and we were doing everybody's attacks in lump sums.
Well, depending upon which Palladium book you're reading and which advice you're following for running, like if you go at it from the old school style, which is you just go in order and use all of your attacks, then yes, that can definitely happen.
Yes.
But if you go at it from the pairing off approach that is written up at least as of the Game Master's Guide and the Ultimate Edition, there's a different flow in there that a lot of people don't realize is expected in the game unless they've read that section, because they might come to this game with the experiences of a whole lot of Dungeons and Dragons under their belt.
Yep.
Which is, you get a turn, you do everything you can on that turn, and then you wait until your next turn, and that's it. In this, the pair-off approach, one again, we know Kevin's love of boxing.
Yes.
In the boxing, the fisticuffs approach, you pair off, you do your thing, and then after you've done your first thing, that could be a single attack, or it could be an aimed, loaded up attack, or whatever. It could cost multiple actions, but it's still one thing. Then your opponent gets to do a thing.
Yep.
So then it ping pongs back and forth like that. So people who say, oh, this guy's got 17 attacks per melee and I've only got 5. He's going to wipe me out before I get to do anything. Well, depending upon which method of flow you're following, no, he might not.
Yep.
This takes the classic old school method and kind of divvies out the Palladium attacks through it into something very similar that I feel is stands in between the two approaches. And I think that's a nice neutral ground.
Yeah, no, I like this. I feel it is still within the spirit of Palladium. It doesn't create incredibly burdensome bookkeeping. And adds some interesting flair. I especially like, I do want to go and check a couple things, but at first blush, I like the interruptibility factor that this adds in. Because my first thought was like, does this particularly disadvantage any particular classes? And I ran through my Rolodex of OCCs in my head, and I didn't come up with any that would be especially screwed. So yeah, no, I can see it. I you should write this up and dump it on our Discord so people can reference it once you get the grenade thing fixed up.
That would be a nice branch off of this to kind of develop and then come back and have a whole new discussion about improving grenade rules. For all I know, there's already a Rifter or 5 dedicated to this.
Oh, you want to open the can of worms that is Uncle Jake talks about explosives again. Got it.
I'm okay with that. Dear listener, I hope you are, because that sounds fun to me.
Well, let's talk about the deflagration to detonation transition barrier. So we'll save that for a future episode.
Okay. But now you got me thinking. Something you said got my brain spinning, and now I want to expand this discussion into an adjacent topic. Very adjacent. In fact, it fits in very well. We might as well cover it. And that is movement in combat.
Yes, that was actually something I was thinking about, because it potentially allows for some fun possibilities of intercepts on a move if you're splitting that over the 3 phases as well.
So this could be tricky. I have opinions on moving in combat. So Palladium's speed determines, I believe, okay, off the top of my head, I think it's the number of yards you can move per round.
I believe you're correct.
It's either yards or feet. I think it's yards. So your speed, yards per round. or maybe it's speed times 10. I forget. Anyway, speed times something, maybe it's even times 1 equals yards that you can move per round. But historically, before 1998, I think, Palladium has never divvied that through your actions. Your movement and your actions were handled separately.
Yep.
Your movement was never proscribed. It was never set in a way that was connected to your attacks.
Mm-hmm.
You could move and you could do your attacks, but there wasn't any kind of a limiting factor from either to the other.
Right. Movement was a functionally free, constant thing that was going on in the background.
You were just assumed to be able to move, act, and divvy them how you wished.
Mm-hmm.
You could move your whole speed and then do all your actions, or whatever.
Yep.
I looked through all of my core books on PDFs and in print, inspired by some recent discussions and questions in our Discord regarding how movement is handled with attacks per melee. And I found the first occurrence of a new rule, in my opinion, new rule from years that I've played it. It's a new rule, which is that you divide your movement by your attacks per melee.
Mm-hmm.
The first appearance of that rule that I've ever found, systems failure. Thanks again, Bill. I hate that rule. I hate it. And it's official now. It's been in everything. I think the only thing it wasn't in after that was the only thing that came out after systems failure that it wasn't in was After the Bomb 2nd edition. Didn't have that rule. But everything else that I saw afterward had that rule. I hate it. I just don't like it. Like I don't like pairing movement with attacks because I think that limits the imagination. I think that limits your ability. It creates this grid it moves us closer to Dungeons and Dragons than it needs to be.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I can see it both ways. So I think there's some validity to what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
And I like to keep it off the grid top with Palladium, just because some of the ludicrousness becomes too much for me if we try to put it on a grid top.
And if we're talking guns with thousands of feet of range,
yeah,
we get to a point where movement and distance doesn't ultimately matter in the long run. So why are we dividing it so meticulously?
See also Jacob's rules for close quarter combat. Yeah. The one upside to divvying out your movement per your actions is if you assume that your speed per round, your movement per round is if you are truly only focused on moving, sprinting, that sort of thing, it inherently makes sense that when you do other actions, you aren't able to travel as fast. Like Usain Bolt can't set a world record while dodging. Serpentine, you know?
Sure, but I hate it.
I understand. I understand.
Like, I think that it puts a box around the imagination, and it forces you to think inside a box. It makes those walls a little bit thicker. It makes it harder, I think, to unleash your imagination when you're forcing yet one more constraint of math upon things that wasn't there previously. Especially if you start thinking of attacks as action points and do things such as calling a shot or aim or spend things to fuel other things so that it limits your mechanical versatility across the round by focusing into one action. Then you become unfairly penalized. And also, there's a lot of arguments that people have made about it. They say that so you are technically penalized for having more actions because now because of your actions, especially if you use some of them, like some of the rare cases of something that's like half of your actions go towards this, like old school spell casting was, it unfairly penalizes people with lots of actions because now they feel that they can only their speed is even further hampered. I've seen arguments in both cases. I just don't think that thinking that level of restricted thinking is, I don't think it's good for the game.
I mean, I'm a big believer that constraint can lead to creativity when balanced appropriately. And this is a case where I see both sides of it, and it's kind of like run it at the table a couple times, see how it plays out, and then I'd make up my mind.
Mm-hmm.
But like the number of times I have seen someone in a Palladium game line up, do a long distance aimed sniper shot called, and then sprint for their full movement and around, or vice versa, has happened more than once and really stick sideways in my craw. And I fully admit that I kind of bend more towards the realism side of things than you do. Yeah, this is one I would like to see at the table and see how it plays out both ways.
The thing for me is that your hand-eye coordination and your leg movement are not necessarily connected.
Oh, they're very connected, though.
The things that I can do with my hands, your dexterity and physical prowess and speed are separate attributes.
Yes.
And your coordination and your movement speed, your movement, if you have a limp,
yeah,
or a club foot, doesn't affect your ability to line up and shoot a gun. Why should one affect the other? Like your speed, you can be slow or fast. Your speed for any number of reasons, and you can get your hand-to-hand attacks from any number of sources, and they're almost always different.
Mm-hmm.
Dividing speed by attacks just doesn't make sense to me. It just doesn't. Like,
I mean,
this is a hill I'm dying on.
Yeah, I can understand that. You're more than welcome to die on that hill. And like I said, I see it both ways, and I don't. So here's the thing. On the side of splitting movement via action point or attack, I see it as a potential open door for creativity through constraint, interesting opportunities for interaction, interesting storytellers via interesting storytelling moments via interception, that sort of thing. On the flip side of not doing that, it serves the rule of cool, which we're big proponents of. Like I said, this is one where I would want to do some intentional at the table testing at which is more just paying attention to how things play out. Really is where I'd come down on this.
Where it ultimately breaks down for me
Mm-hmm.
is due to the increased focus on per action distance of feet or yards. And we're talking like, at this point, we're talking single digits, more or less, unless you're like super, super, super crazy fast. So now we're talking, okay, well, I've moved 7 yards. Okay, I'm going to execute this one. Okay, now I've moved 7 more yards and execute this one. Okay, now I've moved 7 more yards and execute this one. But that doesn't take into account the fact that a battlefield is active.
Mm-hmm.
We're not all standing in place waiting for this to happen.
Right.
The only way to really represent something like that
Mm-hmm.
and to keep track of where everyone is on an action by action positioning
Mm-hmm.
is to use minis. Otherwise, we should just throw out distances entirely and use the modifius zones.
Yeah. I actually honestly tend to be a bigger fan of the zone concept.
Oh, I love the zones. Yeah.
I was using zones back in, well, technically I was
Mm-hmm.
using it in Palladium, because technically Ninjas and Super Spies has a zone system. I even introduced that a little bit into Robotech. But then I was definitely using it during Savage Worlds, because one of the early additions to Savage Worlds was let's just go zones rather than maps. And worked out a lot. And then I encountered it with Modifius, and I think Modifius probably did it best, other than what Ninjas and Super Spies was specifically trying to serve, which was the best for its specific use case.
Warhammer Fantasy 3rd Edition did it as well. And I maybe Star Wars does too. I don't know. I think Genesis might. But the concept of vague ranges.
Yep.
My take on it is that if we're going to be doing something like Rifts, where again, you have a dog boy with a vibro blade and a glitter boy that can shoot for miles.
Right.
At that point, I don't think distance matters all that much. Why do we even have a map on the table? Because we're talking at a scale greater than this one character's movement divided by their attacks per melee even matters.
See also Jacob's rules for CQB, which we'll have to get to sometime, because it's one of my favorite house rules and stuff.
I believe in one of the Rifters coming up, we might have some mechanics for you to take a look at.
Yeah, I think I know which one you're talking about. I'm not a huge fan of those, but they're not bad. They're not bad. I'm definitely with you on the phase thing. I think I want to see it actually play out, because realistically, with the games you and I have played of Palladium, there's been so little actions by the party members available that there wasn't really a point to phase it out. It was attack by attack made more sense, because you were dealing with oftentimes less than 3 phases.
Jacob has largely played with me in either Savage Rifts or Palladium Fantasy 1st Edition.
Because there was the very brief period of traditional Rifts before we swapped to Savage Rifts.
But even then, when I did the traditional Rifts, we were doing it by the hand-to-hand combat rules,
right? And
not using the 2 free for being alive kind of thing, because I didn't know the rule at the time.
Yeah. And so that was a heavily leaning into the New West scenario and a lot of New West character classes, and there weren't that many attacks amongst the player characters.
Yeah, I know. Like a Techno Wizard, a Saloon Bum,
a Mind Melter, and I can't remember the third.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, no. The third was a fucking Cyber Knight.
Oh, yeah. Which, weirdly enough, if you don't know, the 2 for existing rule doesn't have that many attacks early on.
And especially for going by Butts Edition.
Yep. No, I see your point. On the phases, I definitely want to see it, just to go like, yes, I 100% am behind this. I want to see the movement thing both ways, just to pay attention to it and do that before I firmly commit one way or another.
I would say that I could get behind the breaking down of movement by attacks for melee if, and only if, we're doing something very close scale that stays close scale. I'm talking Ninja Turtles or maybe Recon, Beyond the Supernatural, something where we're not mixing mediums of combat in one battle, where we're Ninja Turtles, we're up close and fighting, or we're using modern weapons. And at that point, it's either do you have range or do you not? So at that point, if we're going to do that, then yes, I'd be down for it. In the rare case that I'm going to be playing in a game with a heavy minis focus. And if we're going to do that, I want to know exactly where each person is at each beat of the combat. I could get down with that.
Yeah.
If I'm not running it.
It's really too bad that the Recon way of dealing with this doesn't translate well to the rest of the Palladium system. Good topic. It gave me a lot to think about.
Yeah, it went way longer than I thought because of the sudden tangential discussion. But hey.
Well, yeah, and there was a lot of time spent in there where I had to think about things before I could really frame an articulate response on it.
So what I meant to be a 15-minute episode is now almost 40.
Oh, you're going to chop it down and post edit. I mean, given the amount of dead time where I sat there staring at you while I was thinking about it,
Yeah.
you know, you'll make me sound better in post. Kill my ums.
I try. Well, folks, what are your thoughts on these blasphemous opinions of mine and Jacob's critically wise responses to them? Drop by our Discord and tell us everything that you think. Tell us if you have used the 3-phase rounds, or if you have a new alternate approach to movement in combat that we haven't considered.
Absolutely. And come join us on Discord, and maybe you can get NPC to actually write this up.
Yeah, maybe. I've got so much to write up right now.
Yes, you do.
I have so many
Get to
projects.
work.
Okay, gosh, God.
Starships, magic, mystic martial arts, romance. All of these can be found in A Cloak of Blades by Isaac Scher. You might have heard my name before. I've done a lot of voiceover work for Breakfast Puppies, and I've recently released my first novel. It's available on Amazon as an ebook and paperback, and you can get it for free if you have a Kindle Unlimited subscription. I do hope you'll support my work as you're supporting Breakfast Puppies, and it's been a pleasure talking with you today. Have a good one.
You've been listening to The Glitterbois, a Palladium Books fan podcast. Glitterbois, Rifts, the Megaverse, and all other such topics are the property of Kevin Siembieda and Palladium Books. Please buy all their stuff and help keep them in print and making more games. You can order directly at palladiumbooks.com, and their entire catalog is available digitally at Drive-Thru RPG as well. Our opening music is 8-Bit Bass and Lead by Furby Guy from freesound.org. This closing music is Caravana by Philip Gross, available at freemusicarchive.org. All sound effects used are self-made or acquired via Creative Commons Zero license. If you like what you have heard, find us on Twitter and Facebook as The Glitterbois. That's BOIS. And check us out online at breakfastpuppies.com/glitterbois. And also join us on the Breakfast Puppies Network Discord at breakfastpuppies.com/discord. And if you want to help us out, please spread the word and help us build a community. Thanks again for listening. We'll catch you next time.